The letter arrived on the same day my youngest, Camilla, had been looking forward to for 2 weeks, informing our family that all three of my children were permanently banned from the Ashgrove Meadows community pool due to a documented pattern of safety violations. A claim so specific and so confidently worded that I genuinely believed, reading it the first time, that my kids must have actually done something wrong. It took me exactly one conversation with the pool's own part-time lifeguard to learn that the entire thing had been fabricated, and considerably longer than that to understand exactly why. My name is Farrokh Delacroix. I have 3 kids: Mateo, who's 12, Camilla, who's 9, and Rowan, who's 6. And for 4 years, our family's summer routine had revolved heavily around the Ashgrove Meadows community pool, close enough to walk to, well-maintained, genuinely one of the reasons my wife Odalys and I had chosen this community when we bought our house. The letter cited 3 specific incidents, dated over the preceding month, describing Mateo running on the pool deck, Camilla engaging in unsafe horseplay in the shallow end, and Rowan being left unsupervised near the pool's edge. Each incident supposedly documented and reported by community amenity staff, with the cumulative pattern deemed serious enough to warrant a full-season ban rather than any lesser warning or corrective conversation first. I want to tell you about my initial reaction because I think it's important context for understanding how this situation unfolded. I did not immediately assume the letter was fabricated. I asked all 3 kids directly, that same evening, whether any of what was described had actually happened, and got confused, genuinely bewildered denials from each of them. Mateo insisting he'd never run on the deck, Camilla not even remembering being at the pool on one of the specific dates listed, Rowan, at 6, not able to offer much beyond simple distress at being accused of something he didn't understand. I want to walk you through the conversation that changed my entire understanding of the situation, because it happened almost by accident. I went to the pool the following afternoon, intending to speak with whoever was on duty about the specific incidents, hoping for some clarity about what had actually happened. The lifeguard on duty that day, a college student named Farah Nkemelu who worked there seasonally, told me, once I described what the letter had claimed, that she had absolutely no record or memory of any incident involving my kids on any of the 3 dates listed, and that, in fact, she specifically remembered Rowan's supposed unsupervised incident date because it had been a day the pool was closed entirely for scheduled maintenance. I want to sit with that detail for a moment, because it was the piece of information that told me, beyond any doubt, that this letter had not been generated from any actual documented safety concern at all. My 6-year-old had supposedly been caught unsupervised near a pool that, according to the person actually responsible for monitoring it that summer, had not even been open that day. The woman responsible for issuing that ban was Priscilla Wentworth Ashcombe, president of the Ashgrove Meadows board for a little over a year at that point. I want to walk you through why I believe, based on everything I eventually pieced together, that this ban had nothing whatsoever to do with genuine safety concerns. About 3 weeks before the letter arrived, Odalys and I had spoken up at a community meeting, one of only a handful of families to do so, opposing a proposed special assessment Priscilla had put forward to fund an elaborate landscaping renovation around the pool area, a project that felt, to us and several other families who quietly agreed but hadn't wanted to say so publicly, considerably more extravagant than the community's modest budget could reasonably absorb without meaningful hardship for several households. Priscilla's proposal failed at that meeting, defeated by a fairly narrow margin, and I want to tell you, I did not think much of our own role in that outcome beyond simply having voiced an honest budget concern shared by plenty of neighbors. It was only in hindsight, once the fabricated ban letter arrived less than a month later, that the timing struck me as considerably more than coincidental. I called Priscilla directly after my conversation with Farah the lifeguard, explaining what I'd learned about the pool's closure on the supposedly documented date, and asked her, as calmly as I could manage, to explain the discrepancy. Her response, delivered with a composure that struck me as genuinely unsettling given what she was implicitly admitting to, was that the incident reports had been compiled from multiple sources, and that she would need to review the documentation before commenting further, a response that offered no actual explanation, and notably, no immediate correction or apology, despite the clear, verifiable proof that at least one of the three cited incidents could not possibly have occurred as described. I want to walk you through the decision Odalis and I made over the following week, because it turned out to shape the entire trajectory of this story. We could have pursued this purely as a dispute, demanding the ban's reversal, potentially involving an attorney, fighting through whatever formal appeals process our HOA's governing documents provided. We considered that path seriously. But somewhere in that week of frustrated phone calls and unanswered questions, watching our kids ask, repeatedly, why they weren't allowed at the pool anymore when they hadn't done anything wrong, Odalis said something that shifted our entire approach. "Farrokh," she said, "I don't want to spend the rest of this summer fighting a woman who fabricated incident reports rather than just admit she was retaliating over a budget vote. I want our kids to have a summer. What if we just built our own pool?" I want to tell you that my first reaction was simple practical hesitation. The cost, the logistics, the timeline given how much of the summer had already passed. But the more we talked it through that evening, the more it started to feel less like giving up the fight and more like something considerably more satisfying. A way to sidestep Priscilla's fabricated authority entirely rather than spending months proving, through some formal appeals process she clearly wasn't interested in engaging honestly with, that our kids deserved access to a community amenity we were already paying dues to help maintain. We got quotes from 3 different pool contractors within the week and settled on a mid-sized above-ground pool with a proper deck installation, a project that, expedited given the contractor's early summer scheduling flexibility, could be completed within about 3 weeks, considerably faster than any HOA dispute resolution process was likely to move. I want to tell you about the moment the decision crystallized into something bigger than simply solving our own family's problem, because it happened almost accidentally, in a conversation with our neighbor Bartholomew Grays, who mentioned, in passing while we were discussing the pool project over the fence one evening, that his own kids had also recently received an oddly specific warning letter from Priscilla, though not yet a full ban, citing supposed pool rule violations that his kids, much like mine, had no memory of actually committing. That conversation is what turned our private decision to build a pool into something considerably more pointed and considerably more consequential for Priscilla Wentworth Ashcombe than either Odalis or I had originally intended. Once we realized exactly how many other families across Ashgrove Meadows had, over that same recent period, been quietly targeted with similarly fabricated pool violations, every single one of them, once we started comparing notes. Having recently voiced some form of disagreement with one of Priscilla's board proposals, Bartholomew's mention of his own family's warning letter sent me knocking on doors over the following few days, and what I found, once I'd spoken with about a dozen families across Ashgrove Meadows, confirmed a pattern that went considerably beyond our own household. 7 different families, including mine, had received either a formal ban or a warning letter citing supposedly documented pool safety violations over the preceding 6 weeks, and every single one of those 7 families, once we compared notes carefully, had within the 2 months before receiving their letter either spoken against a Priscilla-backed board proposal at a community meeting, publicly questioned a budget decision, or, in 2 cases, simply declined to sign a petition Priscilla had circulated supporting an unrelated initiative she'd been pushing. I want to tell you about the moment this pattern became undeniable, because it happened during an informal gathering Odalis organized at our house, inviting all 7 affected families to compare their specific letters side by side. Reading them together, laid out across our dining table, the language was strikingly similar across every single one. The same vague, formulaic phrasing about documented patterns and multiple reported incidents, with specific dates that, once we started cross-referencing them against the pool's actual operating schedule, the same way I had with Rowan's supposed unsupervised incident, revealed at least one impossible or verifiably false claim in nearly every single letter. A woman named Rosalind Nkemelu Ferreira, one of the 7 affected families, happened to work as a paralegal and offered to help formalize what we'd found into something considerably more useful than simple neighborhood outrage. "This isn't just petty retaliation anymore," she told the group gathered around my dining table. "This is a documented pattern of a board president fabricating safety violations, specifically targeting families who have opposed her politically. That's a serious governance violation, and depending on how our declaration's fair enforcement provisions are worded, this could support a formal removal action, not just individual appeals." I want to walk you through the 2 tracks this situation took from that point forward, because both mattered enormously for how it ultimately resolved. On one track, Rosalind helped the 7 affected families compile a joint formal complaint, presenting the pattern of fabricated incidents alongside the political timing correlation, and requesting an emergency membership meeting to address Priscilla's conduct directly. On the other track, Odalys and I, alongside our contractor, pressed forward with our own pool project, and it was during this period that the decision to actually charge neighboring families for access emerged, not originally as any kind of political statement, but from simple practical necessity, once word spread informally that our pool was nearly complete and several other affected families, still locked out of the community amenity while the formal complaint process worked through, asked whether their own kids might be able to use ours, at least temporarily. I want to tell you how the arrangement actually worked, because I think the framing matters for understanding why it became such a notable part of this entire story. We didn't set out to run a commercial pool operation. We agreed, informally, to a modest weekly contribution from interested families, an amount that roughly covered our own increased water and chemical maintenance costs, plus a small buffer, extending access specifically to the families affected by Priscilla's fabricated bans. A decision that felt, to all of us involved, less like starting a business and more like a small, informal mutual aid arrangement among neighbors who'd all been locked out of something they were still paying HOA dues to help maintain. Word of this arrangement spread through the broader community faster than any of us expected, and within about 2 weeks, our modest above-ground pool had become something of a minor local phenomenon. Families from well beyond just the 7 originally affected households asking whether they could join the informal arrangement, partly out of genuine need, but, I think honestly, partly out of a kind of quiet solidarity, once the broader community understood exactly why our family had ended up building a private pool in the first place. I want to walk you through the emergency membership meeting Rosalind's complaint eventually triggered, because it happened just as our own pool arrangement was gaining momentum, and the 2 developments together created a particular kind of pressure that I don't think either track alone would have generated as effectively. That meeting, held in the community clubhouse, was packed considerably beyond typical attendance, and Rosalind presented the case methodically, laying out all 7 fabricated incident letters side by side, highlighting the specific impossible or verifiably false claims in each, and drawing the clear correlation between each affected family's prior political opposition to Priscilla and the subsequent fabricated violation notice. Priscilla, given the opportunity to respond, attempted initially to characterize the discrepancies as clerical errors made by whoever had been compiling incident reports on her behalf, an explanation that fell apart almost immediately once a resident near the front pointed out that the letters had all been sent from Priscilla's own personal HOA email account, with her own signature, meaning she could not credibly distance herself from their content by attributing them to some unnamed third party's clerical mistake. A man near the back, someone I didn't know well but who I later learned had also received one of the 7 letters after publicly questioning a different budget item months earlier, asked the question that I think finally broke through whatever remaining defense Priscilla had. 7 families, he said. Every single one of us disagreed with you about something in the 2 months before getting these letters. What are the actual odds that's a coincidence? Priscilla did not have a satisfying answer to that question, and the vote to remove her from the board that night was overwhelming, passed with only a small handful of abstentions, along with a formal resolution immediately rescinding all 7 fabricated bans and warnings, and directing the new interim board to implement a formal, transparent incident documentation policy requiring independent lifeguard or staff verification before any pool access restriction could be issued going forward, closing off the exact loophole that had allowed Priscilla to simply invent violations without any actual accountability. I want to tell you what happened to our own pool arrangement once the community pool access was fully restored to all 7 families. We kept it running for the remainder of that summer, honestly, mostly because it had become something genuinely enjoyable in its own right. A smaller, quieter alternative that several families continued preferring, even once the community pool was fully available to them again, though the modest weekly contribution arrangement gradually shifted into something closer to an informal neighborhood potluck rotation. Families bringing food to share on the weekends they used the pool rather than any strict payment structure, a shift that felt, honestly, like a more fitting evolution for something that had started less as a business venture and more as neighbors looking out for each other during a genuinely unfair situation. I want to tell you about the day Camilla finally went back to the community pool, weeks after the ban was rescinded, and I remember watching her jump into the water with the same easy, uncomplicated joy she'd always had there before any of this happened, seemingly unbothered, in the specific resilient way kids often are, by the weeks of confusion and unfairness that had led up to that moment, though I noticed, with a small twinge of something between pride and lingering frustration, that she still occasionally glanced toward the pool entrance whenever anyone in a staff shirt walked by, a habit that took a little while longer to fully fade. If there's a lesson in this story, I think it's something Rosalind said to me during one of our early planning sessions around my dining table, reviewing all 7 fabricated letters laid out together for the first time. She said that people who abuse small positions of local authority to retaliate against political disagreement often rely on the assumption that each targeted family will experience their situation in isolation, never realizing they're part of a broader, deliberate pattern, and never connecting with the other families experiencing the exact same thing, which makes each individual complaint easier to dismiss or explain away than a coordinated pattern spanning 7 households ever could be. We connected, and it turns out that one impossible incident date on a pool that was closed for maintenance, one paralegal neighbor willing to formalize what we'd all separately noticed, and one modest above-ground pool that turned into considerably more than any of us expected when we first ordered it were more than enough to make sure Priscilla Wentworth-Ashcombe never got to fabricate a single safety violation against anyone in Ashgrove Meadows ever again. Thumbnail text.